Okay, so let's begin your third lesson, which is about energy and nutrient relations. So, organisms use different materials from their environments as sources of energy and carbon. So, this is one of the ways by which we classify organisms, which is based on how they acquire their energy and carbon. So, autotrophic organisms, known as primary producers, so these ones here, these are organisms that use inorganic substances to produce energy. So an excellent example that we have in this photo are the plants, all of these. So these are known as photoautotrophs since they use photosynthesis for producing the compounds that they need for survival. Of course, there are other types of autotrophs like chemosynthetic autotrophs, which use inorganic compounds, also use inorganic compounds for producing the products that they need for survival, except that these organisms use inorganic substances to power the processes for producing the compounds that they need. So examples of these organisms are bacteria that are found in deep sea vents. So, it's an area that light can't penetrate. So photosynthetic organisms are not the primary producers here. All ecosystems on Earth depend on producers to, in a way, convert the energy present in the habitat into a form that's usable by other organisms. So without these producers, even if, let's say, there's an abundance of materials in the environment, there's no way for other organisms to use these materials to produce the compounds that they need in their bodies. Why? Because these are locked in a form that's unusable to them. Okay, so what then happens is that organisms will not be able to exist in that kind of environment. So think of it this way. You have a lot of sunlight, water, carbon dioxide, other inorganic compounds in an area. So potentially these materials together can support life, right? But without plants, there will be nothing to convert these materials into a form that can be used by other organisms. So that's why producers are extremely important. They're needed for that conversion. So we keep talking about conversion. So in what form do other organisms use these materials from plants? Well, simply put, it's through plant tissues. Okay? So animals that consume plant tissues use it as energy to power their own metabolic processes in order to produce their own tissues and their other materials necessary for their survival. So other animals in turn, consume these animals, and then they live their lives. They decompose when they die, and then decomposers return these materials back into the soil for use by plants. So it's a cycle that just goes on in nature. So in these photos here, you have plants as primary producers in a forest, okay? And then in the deep sea vent shown here, you have chemoautotrophic bacteria as producers. Of course, you can't see them because they're microscopic, but they're just somewhere there. So we talked about producers or autotrophs, right? How then do we classify organisms that eat producers and other organisms? Well, these organisms are known as consumers or heterotrophs. So we can also further classify them based on what they eat. So those that directly eat producers are known as primary consumers. So these are more often than not plant eaters. Okay? And then those that eat primary consumers are secondary consumers. So these are the ones that eat the plant eaters. And then we have tertiary consumers that eat the secondary consumers. And then we have the quaternary consumers that eat the tertiary consumers. And it usually ends there at the quaternary level. But again, it depends on what kind of environment that you're looking at. Okay? So just some examples. We have birds. This type of bird specifically is a raptor because of the hooked beak. So it's primarily a meat eater, another meat eater, another meat eater. These vary, sometimes plants, sometimes meat. These eat plankton, and as many people do not expect, fungi are considered heterotrophs. These are not photosynthetic. Okay, they don't produce their own food through sunlight. We'll explain that in more detail later, of course. So, in a nutshell, what's important to know as we begin this lesson is that producers use inorganic sources of energy and carbon for producing their own food and their own compounds for survival, whereas consumers use organic sources. Okay? Organic sources in the form of other organisms. So consumers either eat producers or eat other consumers.